Hello and welcome to BatFlip Crazy YouTube. I am your host, Toby. Today we are going to look at one of my favorite fantasy baseball tools and resources, and that is xstats.org. xstats.org is a website created by Andrew Perpetua, who writes at Rotographs. And essentially, he took the batted ball data of every single batted ball, exit velocity, vertical launch angle, and horizontal launch angle, and figured out what the likelihood was that every single batted ball was going to be single, double, triple, home run, base hit, and through that created expected statistics like expected average, expected WOBA, things that you also see on Baseball Savant, MLB's expected stats creator. But I rely on XStats more so than the Baseball Savant because XStats also uses the spray angle or the horizontal angle of batted balls, whereas Baseball Savant does not. It just uses vertical launch angle and exit velocity. Andrew has also added a variety of different elements to it too, whether it's temperature, park factors. He's integrated a lot of different elements into the expected stats. And so I really appreciate kind of the transparency that he has in creating that. So that's all well and good. How do we use xstats.org? Now I use this in a lot of my analysis, and it starts right here. xstats.org is the name of the website. And what you're going to do if you want to access the spreadsheets that Andrew has created is just scroll down right here. You have xstats version 2.9 batters and xstats version 2.9 pitchers. And then you also have the past 30 days for both batters and pitchers. You can't do like a custom search over a period of time. That's one of the downsides, but you can look over the last 30 days. So that's a really helpful in-season tool to use. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on one of these. So we'll just use batters as an example here. And you're going to have access to a wealth of data here. So you have the last 4 seasons, all of the seasons that we have StatCast data for, and all of the hitters that you have in front of you as well. So we are just going to take a look really quickly. Let's take a look at Jerks Profar, for instance, just randomly. Random selection of Jerks Profar. So what this spreadsheet gives you is Jerks Profar has played 3 years. Here you go. You have all of the general data that you would have in a spreadsheet. And this is where it starts to get interesting. You have the number of hits that he was able to produce, singles, doubles, triples, home runs. You also have the expected hits, expected singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. So right away we can see Jerks Profar had more expected hits and he had regular hits, but he also had fewer expected home runs than home runs. Again, all of the expected data is based on exit velocity, vertical and horizontal launch angle, as well as a couple other factors that I mentioned, like park factors, of every single batted ball in Major League Baseball and what the likelihood is that that would be that type of hit. Now we get into our traditional stats, average, OBP, and you have expected average and OBP over here. You have WOBA, you have XOBA over here, not XWOBA since that's the XStats, or that's the Baseball Savant version of it. So you can see 254 average, 270 expected average. So what this tells you is maybe Profar was a little bit unlucky last year on balls in play in terms of those falling in, maybe a little bit lucky on home runs. Now, what I really like to look at a lot is if you scroll all the way over on this first spreadsheet, is these 6 categories right here. PU percentage is pop-up percentage, FB is fly ball percentage, HD is hard drive percentage, line drive is LD percentage, GB percentage is ground ball percentage, and DB percentage is dribbler percentage. Now, there's a really cool article that Andrew wrote when he released the latest version of XStats. And it's right here, new batted ball classes from last year. And essentially, he took a look at all the different batted balls that were hit and found that found these 6 categories of types of batted ball and the results that accompanied them. And so when we take a look at this, this is what's really cool is you can see how each type of batted ball across Major League Baseball fared. So dribbler percentage right here, DB percentage, those are really poorly hit ground balls. They have a batting average of 124, and so essentially a BABIP of 124 as well, because they're not going for home runs, right? There was 2 home runs that were hit that were dribblers last year. And then the percent overall of balls in play that they are. And so you can see kind of, if you hit a dribbler, chances are you're going to get out or, a single. Ground balls, now these are actually different than dribblers in the sense that these are harder hit ground balls, right, that oftentimes go for base hits. You'll see there's a 369 batting average here, some doubles, some triples, home runs. So generally speaking, these are pretty solidly hit balls. They're going to help your BABIP overall. And so it's not a terrible thing to see. And I think the key distinction here is your traditional ground ball would probably categorize most of these into one bucket. But what XStats allows us to do is get a little bit more granular, a little bit more precise, and see the fact that no, there's actually, you could probably get more precise even. You'd have to ask Andrew about that. But what you can see is these aren't at all the same, right? Hitting a dribbler is much less successful than hitting a ground ball. People who actually hit a decent amount of ground balls will probably have a higher batting average than you would expect. So that's one key element too. Another key thing is the differentiation in balls that are hit in the air. So you have your line drive here, and these are really your BABIP. They really push that BABIP up, right? 759 average, only 10 home runs. So we're not talking about like a super high WOBA or slugging percentage on these. Although there's a decent amount of doubles, a decent amount of triples here, and so these are really your low line drives that tend to go for base hits more often than not, right? 75, 76% of the time. Now, hard drives are your higher line drives, your lower fly balls that tend to go, as we see, for home runs or extra base hits, right? Very few singles in this category of batted ball. A lot of home runs, 683 average, 1156 WOBA. These are really, really nice, but they're also hard to hit, right? These are kind of your ideally hit batted balls. Your fly balls and your pop-ups have the lower batting average, 235, and then just 2 out of 100 pop-ups actually fall in for base hits. We're talking Alex Bregman, his game-winning, quote-unquote, base hit against the Padres, right? That's what we're talking about here. So 2 out of every 100. These are essentially automatic outs here. And I love what it does here is, you normally have your traditional ground ball, line drive, fly ball. But this really tells you, fly balls aren't a terrible thing too, right? You got a decent amount of home runs. The WOBA isn't great, but there is the chance that hit will be go for an extra base hit or a home run. Whereas a pop-up, you're going to get super lucky occasionally. But outside of that, it's pretty much an automatic out. And then you have your line drives really distinguishing between, your what we traditionally think as line drives, your singles, occasionally doubles to the gap, depending on what the horizontal launch angle is. But then your hard drives, that's really the bread and butter. And what I love as well is you can see right here the year-to-year correlations. And so when we're thinking about from year to year, what is the likelihood that somebody's going to continue or sustain their success? What this really does is tell us that, the 3 batted ball categories that we're most interested in are hard drives, because year to year they have the highest correlation of all the batted ball types. Your pop-ups, also high year-to-year correlation, and your dribblers, right? And in some ways it's not that surprising because it's kind of the high and low end of the spectrum in terms of dribblers and pop-ups, and then your ideally hit batted balls, which is probably more skill than luck. And so that's one thing to consider as you're analyzing folks is really paying attention to the dribbler percentage, the pop-up percentage, and the hard drive percentage as kind of the ones that you want to focus your attention on. The line drives, the ground balls, the fly balls, not a very high year-to-year correlation. And so really don't want to be paying too much attention to them. So that's just a little bit of something, and right here you can see a visual of kind of vertical launch angle or exit velocity and then vertical launch angle and kind of where different balls fall in, right? So your hard drives up there, line drives, fly balls, pop up, ground balls, and then dribblers right here. So hopefully that provides a little bit of context. But what you can see right here is some of the changes year to year. So let's take a look at Profar. Actually, you want to know something? Profar is not a very good example because his years are not the same. He barely played last year. Let's take a look at Jose Ramirez and kind of what may have fueled that breakout that he had this year. So what we'll do, let's take a look right here. So we got the 6 batted ball categories. Again, not your traditional ground ball, line drive, fly ball, but 6, more precise version of this, right? So his pop-up percentage last year actually increased dramatically by about 5%. Now we may think, oh, 5%, that doesn't sound like a lot. That's 50 points in batting average, essentially, that he's chopped off because only 2 out of 100 of those hits end up falling in for hits. So that's a huge, huge impact, right? And probably the reason why you see that expected average at 282 from 318 last year because of that. He was hitting so many more fly balls, but a lot of those were actually not good fly balls. So then the fly ball, pretty consistent, as you can see year to year here. The hard drive percentage, though, huge increase right here to 4%. So 4% more of his batted balls were of that, were ideally hit, and that's really great to see, and one of the reasons why he hit a career high number of home runs last year. Line drives, again, we see the fluctuation here, a dip in 5% in terms of line drive, again, probably negatively impacting batting average. And again, like look at the balls, and the BABIP different there is about 50 points, right? That's huge, and that reflects the increase in pop-ups, the decrease in line drives, and even a decrease in ground balls. Also a decrease in dribblers. So we can see really there's a huge movement towards balls hit in the air, with a good deal of them being better hit balls in the hard drive percentage, but then also these pop-ups right here. So that is negatively impacting him here. And then these categories, the ground ball percentage, the line drives, a lot of the singles that don't have a high year-to-year correlation, you see them dropping dramatically. And so the question will be heading into next year is how much do we think that maybe some of the pop-ups will go away and those will be replaced by line drives and ground balls, or other fluctuations that might increase his BABIP and his batting average. So that's one thing to do. It also gives the average launch angle, 18.8, and the average exit velocity, 87.6, and the total number of balls in play right there. So that's kind of like an overview of the first spreadsheet that you will find, which is the one that I really focus a lot of my attention on. And if you're looking for kind of like a quick go-to just to take a look, you can see right here, you got your value hit percentage, which is kind of like the barrels equivalent for XStats, 11.8%. So that went up 0.8% for Ramirez, whereas his poor hit percentage stayed pretty consistently the same. So that's just something to note. Overall, he hit about the same number of really solid contact and the same amount of poor contact. So you can see right here, whereas if you were to look at his traditional fly ball, ground ball, line drive, you may not get as precise a sense of, okay, exactly what happened with the balls that he hit in the air. Maybe his fly ball percentage went up considerably, but exactly what type of batted ball in the air did that take place? There was a player I was looking at recently where the fly ball rate didn't change that much, but the pop-up percentage increased dramatically, and so that's really important to note because you miss that just looking at fly ball percentage and not focusing on that more precise and detailed version there. One thing that I also like to do is if a player has a history like Ramirez does, is see if there may be something that XStats either is missing, or if there's some sort of consistent under or over performance. So for instance, we look here, 6 home runs, 6.6 home runs, 11, 11, 29 last year, 24.7, so off by about 4 home runs, and then again off by about 4 home runs here. Now that's close enough where maybe there was maybe whether it was wind or some other factor pushed a few more of those home runs there. But in the batting average department, like if you start to notice some major discrepancies that are pretty consistent. So right here, underperformed by 13 points, right on. So this is xStats has generally been pretty close for Ramirez. So the 270 average, the 282. If I was looking this over, I might consider the expected average more of the kind of true talent level of batting average. And the 270 kind of maybe some bad luck that he experienced, at least from a batting average perspective. And then you can always look at the xOBA over here to get a sense, 401 versus a 398 WOBA. So they actually, have him underperforming slightly, but, so close that, it's right on there. So this gives you a good sense of how you might be able to use this first page right here of xStats. And again, it's very easy. And what you can do is if you want to filter it, you can actually go up here and just you can do view. What is it? Data. Filter views, and then you can filter by year and so on and so forth. So really, really helpful. You can also look at batter balls in play spreadsheet right here. So if we do the same thing looking at Ramirez, what this will tell us is a little bit more detail about how he did in each category. So you see right here, a lot of the same information that we have on the other page, expected singles, expected home runs, dribbler percentage, pop-up percentage, all of that stuff. But what we can get over here is actually look at, okay, his dribblers, the launch angle increased slightly. Here's the average exit velocity. It was actually higher than it was, last year. So maybe they weren't as bad of dribblers, if that's the thing. You can see here, on his ground balls, exit velocity, fairly similar, a little bit down, angle slightly down, line drives, again, I used to use this a lot more in the previous version of xStats because what it would do is instead of breaking it down by a combination of exit velocity and launch angles already in these categories, and had it broken down by launch angle and then the exit velocity at those launch angles. You're not going to see a ton of change necessarily between right here in terms of the angle and the exit velocity, and that's only because the batted balls are grouped based on their exit velocity and launch angle. And so, it's not taking every single ball hit at a 20-degree launch angle and giving you the exit velocity for those balls. It's actually categorizing the different balls hit at 20 degrees based on their exit velocity and putting it in different categories. So and then you also have the splits down here. But I find that xStats is really, really helpful in terms of determining what somebody's true talent level may be and where they may have gotten lucky or unlucky during the season. A good example would be Matt Carpenter. Early in the season, he was really struggling. If you took a look at his xStats, they really liked what he was doing. He was hitting the ball at much better launch angles, hitting a ton of hard drives, and just not seeing any luck in terms of whether they were falling in or not. And so I stuck with him because of that, and was rewarded for that. But you can also see where players may be struggling, right? So somebody who may be overperforming the expected stats. A good example of that is Eddie Rosario, who's a guy I love. When I looked at him around midseason, he was overperforming his expected stats. And so, I loved the value that I was getting him at that point, but I traded him for pitching. I just so happened to trade him for Trevor Bauer, who ended up getting injured very shortly thereafter. But that's an example how you can also use somebody who's gotten really lucky in terms of their batted balls to identify guys that you may want to may want to sell high on. Similarly, with pitchers, you can see the same data here with pitchers if you go to the pitcher tab. And then let's give an example of a pitcher who may have broken out this year. Blake Snell's actually a good one. Not in there. There we go. Snell. So Blake Snell's actually a really good one. So we take a look right here. So you can see, ERA, FIP, SC FIP, KW FIP, BB FIP. These are all different types of ERA estimators that use different inputs to be calculated. You see the plate appearances, at-bats, earned runs, strikeouts, all of the general stuff that you'd see. And again, here's where you start to see the interesting stuff. Hits, 112 hits, but 129.6 expected hits. 16 home runs, 18.1 expected home runs. So got really lucky on batted balls last year. How lucky? A 178 average should have been a 206 average according to XStats. So you can see, again, 246 WOBA should have been a 273 WOBA according to XStats. Now, again, we can look at all of these things right here to get a sense of how lucky they might have been. And then let's see, is there a consistent over or under performance? So 113 versus 116.7. So pretty much, in line there, 93 and 91.1, again, in line there. So I'm leaning towards believing that there was some luck with Snell. And I think when we look at his BABIP, 242 BABIP, that is very, very low. And it should have been 282 according to XStats, which seems much more reasonable for him. Similarly, with the expected home runs, you can do the same thing. 16, 18.1, 15, 15.5, 5, 6.5. So generally in line, except for this year a little bit of a difference. 2 home runs isn't much. But what I like the most is going over here and again looking at the same type of stuff that we saw with the hitters. So pop-up percentage. His pop-up percentage, which is good for pitchers, actually declined. All right. His fly ball rate, though, went up by about 1. Again, these are low BABIP batted balls, generally out. Some of the fly balls will go for home runs. Hard drives actually increased by 1.4%. So that's really interesting to see. Line drives down. Again, not high year-to-year correlation, but important to note, those are high BABIP line drives. Ground balls down 2%. Again, not year-to-year correlation, but they went down, so that limits the BABIP a little bit. And the dribbler percentage went up about 1%. Then when we look overall, we see that his poor hit percentage went down about 6%, and his value hit percentage also went down 0.3. So just by looking at these numbers, what this tells me is the batted balls that Snell gave up last year were not, he actually gave up a higher quality of batted ball, generally speaking, when we weigh both the value hits and the poor hits. And so that makes me a little suspect again about the very low BABIP, because, when we look at his BABIP in previous years, 281, 290, so we'd expect something more around this number that we had last year at 281, 290 because of the hits, right? But what's also key to weigh in is he's also striking out a ton more guys, right? 10% more of the batters that he faced struck out, 9.1%, 1.5% of the batters, fewer batters walked, and so there's a lot of really good developments that we're obviously seeing with Snell. I mean, he's nasty, he's sick, his skills are off the charts. But when we're just looking at BABIP, right, and trying to determine whether we might expect, again, similar production next year, this is something just to factor in. I don't think that the 242 BABIP was based necessarily on Snell's skills. I think much more had to do with him being a little bit lucky. And so I'm not going to expect him to get that lucky again. And then when we look at the batted ball types that do have a higher year-to-year correlation, your hard drives went up. So maybe, again, it's not a huge amount, but again, that has the highest year-to-year correlation, as does the pop-ups and the dribblers. And what we saw is that they all, the dribblers went up 1%, which is really good. The pop-ups went down 1%, which is not good. And the hard drives went up, 1.5%, which is not good. So overall, the batted ball profile stayed fairly similar, but there is some movement there in the wrong direction in a couple of places. And so that's just something to note. Not that I'm going to take away from Snell at all based on those small percentages, but again, just factoring that into, can I expect a repeat of that 242 BABIP? Snell's probably not a good example because, for the most part, whenever somebody gets a 242 BABIP, there's some luck or excellent defense involved, and that could be the case with Snell since the Rays are really solid. But that just gives you a sense of kind of what you can look at and how you can use XStats as one data point within the overall, within all of the data points that you're looking at to determine whether or not, you believe the production of a player and whether you think they may regress back to what was, their previous numbers versus maintaining a new, better, or in some cases worse performance. So that's just some of the ways that I use XStats. Again, it's an incredible resource for folks. I highly, highly, highly recommend using it. Right here, xstats.org. You can follow XStats on Twitter at MLB XStats. And then Andrew Perpetua, who created it, is also on Twitter at Andrew Perpetua, I believe. And so, this is just a really excellent resource in season. It's also really, really great because you can kind of see who's underperforming or overperforming. You can also do things like looking at who is the leader of hard drives, and kind of identifying guys who may be taking a step to the next level in terms of the quality of batted ball that they're producing. So if you take this data and then you integrate that along with maybe some barrel data from MLB Savant, some of the fly ball distance data that they have as well. And then you take a look at the Fangraphs kind of player discipline pages. And you just take all of this information and you try to round out the best picture that you can about the true talent level of a player, what the skills are, what direction they're heading, whether what they're showing is predictive of future performance or whether it's just describing, what they're doing right now. So these are all different points of data that you can use to give yourself the best picture of how a player is doing. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little long, but I wanted to go into depth, in terms of how I use XStats and how you might be able to apply it in your own baseball research. So let me know what you think. Thank you so much for following us on YouTube. If you like the video, please do subscribe. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to doing more videos for folks in the near future. Thanks so much for watching.